You know, niggas gotta get their priorities together. Got their mind on the wrong things, spending their money in the wrong way.
Trapaholics, real trap shit.
Say you need that car with the rims and that charm, just like Jim. It's more than life. Yeah.
I'm telling you. Talk to him.
Say you need that LV bag
For what?
with the belt and the hat.
That's all you got though.
It's more than life. Yeah.
Talk to him. Real.
Say you wanna turn up at the club,
Why?
buy some bottles, impress them girls.
what?
It's more than life.
Oh, fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And who dat? And I am Ethan, and we're here. We got some more main course for you. There hasn't been a lot going on in Saints news with free agency kind of winding down and all the teams just trying to get prepared for the draft. But there's a little bit of stuff I can probably play off my last podcast and maybe ad lib off of it with a little bit of news that coincided with my last podcast. So we got just a couple topics to get into. So let's get into the first one right now. So can I get a menu? And the first one I wanted to talk about was this was a player that was on my wish list and probably on a wish list of Derek Carr as well, or just Dennis Allen, any of those former Raiders to complete the transition to the New Orleans Raiders, which is what we're seeing at the moment. And shortly after putting Foster Monroe on my wish list on the last podcast, pretty much right after I posted it and it was up and streaming, it came out that he actually had Hodgkin's lymphoma that during a physical, the New Orleans Saints medical staff actually discovered, which that was wild to me. You know, the Saints have found health issues and concerns with players in the past, like in the 2017 offseason with Nick Fairley having the enlarged heart valves and things like that, causing it to where he hasn't been caused it to where he couldn't continue his career anymore. So the Saints medical staff, I mean, they get a lot of flack for malpractice, you know, with players in the past, with Keenan Lewis and Delvin Breaux, and recently, just in recent memory, with Michael Thomas with he had a second dislocated toe that they didn't find out about until like weeks later. Things like that. But I mean, those are just simple injuries, you know. Those aren't live or die type of situations. So I don't know. Maybe it kind of evens out there because you got them saving lives at the same time, but you also have them ruining players' careers as well. But at least they're not going to die. But with Foster Monroe, he's had some interviews and talked with different media people, and on one of them, he says he expects to return to play, similar to players that had cancer like that, like Eric Berry and James Conner, but that's not his top priority right now. Also, he says he'll be staying in New Orleans near his family while being treated by a local specialist. So what I actually take from all of this, and him having visited the Bengals before the Saints, is I think the Saints must have put him through a more extensive workout and physical. I'm not 100% sure how they diagnosed the lymphoma, if he had swollen lymph nodes or they did a blood test on him. But just because they found it and the Bengals didn't, I was almost sure that he was gonna. It was almost going to be a sure thing that the Saints were going to sign him, because they must have put him through a more extensive workout and physical than he got when he was in Cincinnati. So they were obviously really serious about signing him. So that's, you know, thankfully hopefully they caught it in time and he'll be healthy. But it's also if you're just going from the Saints fan perspective, it's a little bit of a bummer because I feel as if the Saints were probably going to sign him. And Boss Monroe, he says he's grateful for the New Orleans Saints supports and their fans. So, it sounds like he's going to try to keep a good rapport with New Orleans, the New Orleans Saints team and the fans. So maybe if he gets over this in the next year or two, maybe he'll be able to come back because he's only 26 years old. And kind of want to look into that right now because he mentioned Eric Berry and James Conner, and those two players came back and were very competitive and very good even after their diagnosis. So Eric Berry, he was diagnosed all the way back in 2014. Wow, but that 2014 season was almost 10 years ago. Time flies, but yeah, in that season, the 2014 season, he only played in 6 games and started 5 of them. So he didn't. I guess they found it during the season, causing him to miss the rest of the season. Hard to know exactly if you do, unless you do all the research, because Eric Berry was kind of injury prone throughout his career. So I don't know if an injury cut his season short in 2014, or if it was because they found that he had the cancer then. But anyways, he was diagnosed with it in 2014, but then he came back just the next year in 2015 and was a Pro Bowl All Pro, first team All Pro, and then in 2016 he was a Pro Bowl again and All Pro. But then in 2017, 2018, he started having ACL and Achilles injuries that pretty much led to him only playing 3 more games in his career, which was sad because he was a player that a lot of people thought was on the similar arc to being a Hall of Fame safety, kind of like Sean Taylor before his career kind of got derailed by injuries and the cancer diagnosis. But it showed that you can come back and still be a great player even after being diagnosed with cancer. And then James Conner, the more recent player that was diagnosed with something similar to Foster Monroe, he was diagnosed with it in 2020, and he only played in 13 games with 11 starts, and he just in comparison to what he's done since. So in that season, he had 169 yards rushing, 721 yards, 169 rushes with 721 yards, 6 touchdowns, and then that's a 4.3 average. And then he had 43 targets with 35 catches for 215 yards. That was in the season of 2020 before he got diagnosed. So then he was diagnosed and obviously was cleared to play just the next season in 2021, and he played in 15 of 16, or I guess that would have been of 17 games, so 15 of 17 games with 6 starts. He had 202 rushes, 752 yards rushing, and 15 rushing touchdowns. And his average per carry wasn't really that impressive. It was only that 3.7, but I guess he was a really good goal line back. But this is an impressive number here. He had 39 targets for 37 catches, so almost caught every single pass thrown to him that season for 375 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I think it doesn't say that he was the player that led the league in touchdowns, so he must not have been, but had 18 touchdowns and was a Pro Bowler the next season coming off of the Hodgkin's lymphoma. So his numbers were almost identical, besides the fact that he had 15 touchdowns. And then in 2022, just last year, he played in 13 games, started 13 games out of 17. So he missed a couple, and he had 183 yards rushes with 782 yards with 7 touchdowns, and that's a 4.3 yard per carry average. So that's all just right back to where he was before he even got diagnosed with cancer. And then he had 58 targets for 46 catches for 300 yards and a touchdown. So it shows that players can come back and be just as good as they were before, or even in Eric Berry's case, maybe arguably better because he was the comeback player of the year and a two-time All-Pro afterwards. So this is not something that's impossible for Foster Monroe to overcome. You just have to get it right and get all the cancer out of his system. And who knows, he could be seeing how he's staying in New Orleans because that's where his family are, and seeing how that's the team that found it, and the fans are so supportive. I could very well see Foster Monroe as a New Orleans Saints in the future. But so the Saints didn't get didn't get Foster Monroe during that time, so they missed out on adding another ex-Raider player to their team to continue Dennis's Allen the transformation of the New Orleans Saints into the New Orleans Raiders, with him bringing all his ex-coaches and stuff for when back in his Raiders day, and bringing in Derek Carr to be the quarterback, and bringing in Jonathan Abrams, a safety, big hitter, energy guy, and Jonathan Abrams. So you already have pretty much the entire coaching staff from when he was the Raiders here. So everyone besides Pete Carmichael is pretty much an ex-Raider, practice coach or assistant. So, but we missed out on Foster Monroe. But what do we go do? What do we go do instead of looking for other players from different franchises? We go and sign ex-Raider Brian Edwards. And Brian Edwards didn't technically play for the Las Vegas Raiders in 2022, but he played for Atlanta. But in 2021, he played for them and had a pretty decent season. In 2022, he only played in 7 games with 1 start, 5 targets for 3 receptions, and 15 yards receiving. So he didn't do much with Atlanta last year. But in 2021, these are some interesting numbers here that kind of come up when talking about what the Saints are trying to do with their receiving core, because they have a great young receiver in Chris Olave, and then they have the burner and Rashid Shaheed, and the guy that they were really missing last year was Michael Thomas. The guy, a possession receiver, a contested catch receiver, and that's something that people, I think Brian Edwards can maybe help with, or maybe that's why they were trying to get Foster Monroe, or they can still look to the draft. But these are some interesting stats from PFF. So this is Brian Edwards' numbers from 2021 when he was a Raider, and he made 10 contested catches in 2021, and that's out of 34 catches. So that doesn't seem like a lot, but it actually kind of is when you see that he didn't have that many chances, total catches in general. So, but from the Saints player that had the most in 2022, just last year, was Chris Olave, who had just eight or less opportunities or catches, 8 contested catches in 2022. And Chris Olave, Chris Olave had like 80 something catches, but this is just contested catch opportunities. He had 24 contested catch opportunities. So if that's wild to see that, almost as many total catches that Chris Olave Brian Edwards has. It's almost the same amount of contested catches Chris Olave had all season. But it's pretty clear to see who's a better possession receiver just out of Chris Olave. Obviously, the overall better receiver is Chris Olave, but Brian Edwards being 6'3", 215 pounds, that's just a different type of receiver that he's built similar to Michael Thomas when you have Chris Olave, who's what, 6 foot, 185 pounds. So you can see where he just has the physical makeup to make those contested catches. So, I mean, if he could get back to his 2021 numbers when he played 16 games, started 12, had 59 targets, 34 catches, with 10 of them apparently being contested catches, and 571 yards receiving for 3 touchdowns. If he could get back to that would go a long way with adding depth to the Saints receiving core. But I asked my Raiders buddy before the Saints signed him which receiver he liked better between Brian Edwards and Zay Jones, and he told me he liked Zay Jones more, even though I kind of put these guys into similar molds, kind of, because in 2021, Zay Jones played 17 games with 9 starts with 74 targets, 87 or 70 targets, 47 catches with 546 yards receiving and 1 touchdown. So his numbers were almost identical. Their numbers were almost identical to each other. But then in 2022, he signed a decent sized contract to go to Jacksonville and had a pretty nice season compared to Brian Edwards hardly doing anything. He had 121 targets, 82 catches, 823 yards receiving, and 5 touchdowns. So, I mean, he blew Brian Edwards' stats out of the pool there, blew him out of the water in comparison. Even though I when watching them back in 2021, I thought they were very similar players in productions, but apparently not. But the Saints continue to try to transform into the New Orleans Raiders regardless, and that was just the next most recent Raider addition to this Saints team during this offseason. And the only other transaction that happened since then was Malcolm Roach is coming back, and that's a good signing, I think, because the Saints did lose quite a bit of depth by losing David Onyemata and Shy Tuttle. So being able to re-add this young player, because he's only going to be 25 years old this year. So who knows? He could. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years for a player to finally hit their prime or hit that peak. So still being able to get him back, and the numbers haven't come out yet, but I imagine it's probably close to veteran minimum probably for him and Brian Edwards. So it's nice getting him back because he only played 13 games with 3 starts, had a sack, 26 total tackles, 14 solo, 12 assists, 2 tackles for loss, and 2 quarterback hits. And limited play, that's pretty much as good as anyone they lost in Shy Tuttle and David Onyemata, who were the starters. But yeah, that's about it for Saints additions. Let's talk about players that I knew. I was just waiting for the Saints to. In the last podcast, I was just waiting for Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos to add this player. And this player that I'm talking about is I was surprised when looking on the available free agents of the New Orleans Saints. I was kind of surprised that Bradley Roby was still there, which he still is, and Marquez Callaway was still there. And I didn't say that I was surprised that the Saints hadn't re-signed Marquez Callaway yet. I said it because I was surprised that Denver and Sean Payton haven't signed him yet. And similar to just posting it, and the next thing you know, he signed with the Denver Broncos. That's similar to what happened last podcast. So Marquez Callaway, uh, who was probably, arguably, between him and Deontay Hardy, were the Saints' best wide receivers in 2021, goes and signs with the Denver Broncos for 1 year, $1.35 million. And that's just let's see here. And the cap, that's the total cap as well, $1.135 million on the cap there. So yeah, he ends up going where I thought he was going to go, and seems like Sean Payton just likes having his guys around, because that wasn't the only addition. They ended up signing longtime Saints defensive, I don't even know what you call him, assistant coach, linebacker coach with the Saints. He was pretty much in the retirement home until, I guess, his buddy Sean Payton called him. And Joe Vitt is now with an assistant coach for the Denver Broncos now. And out of all the Saints players and assistant coaches the Saints have lost, that's probably the one I'm least worried about, because Joe Vitt was, after the Saints Super Bowl win and all the Bounty Gate stuff, where he was the assistant head coach, or the, I guess not the assistant, but the part-time head coach, while Sean Payton, he was pretty much here with Brian Johnson and I think Bill Johnson and him, when they were just constantly a 7-9 team. So I'm not overly concerned about losing him. The player that I probably was more concerned about was just losing a young up and coming, like, offensive line coach, a quarterback offensive line coach in Zach Strief. But Saints went ahead and tried to add to that by signing future Hall of Famer Jari Evans to join the staff. So maybe he can fill that void. And I mean, it doesn't hurt to have that kind of leadership and someone with those kind of credentials on the team. So I'm all for that. But I think it's very comical that the Denver Broncos are becoming the Denver Saints, and the Saints are becoming the New Orleans Raiders, slowly as we speak. But seems like things, like I said, have kind of slowed down, mostly on the free agency market. Seems like people are more interested in these young prospects that are going to be drafted at the end of April. But anyways, I think that's all I have for you this evening. So with that, can I get a check, please?